As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Does your family ever get exasperated with you for stockpiling such things as paper towels, bottled water, or toilet tissue? Well, they certainly can't object to you stockpiling money. Silver, the only money recognized by the U.S. Constitution, and your first 10-ounce bar of pure silver can be had at spot price with no premium by going to sdbullion.com/rp. And when you buy it that way, you'll be supporting Reluctant Preppers as well by going to sdbullion.com/rp. Thanks. Hey, Reluctant Preppers. If you haven't heard, we've already started our monthly 1-ounce U.S. Silver Eagle thank you gift to one active Patreon subscriber each month, signed by your host, Dunnigan Kaiser. And you don't want to miss out on that.
Please help us grow by subscribing today at patreon.com/reluctantpreppers.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. It's been over a year since we've had this guest on. Kerry Lutz is the founder and host of the Financial Survival Network, FSN.com. He's here with us again on Reluctant Preppers to answer your viewer questions. Kerry was also the co-founder of the Liberty Mastermind Symposia that we were able to attend and meet many of the other guests that we've had on our channel. Kerry, thanks once again for joining us here on Reluctant Preppers.
My pleasure.
We've got a number of questions from our viewers, but before we get into that, if you could just tell us from your perspective, what do you see as maybe the 1, 2, or 3 most concerning topics that you see emerging in today's economic world and with the guests that you've had on your show?
Well, you can never talk about economics without talking about the debt.
Mm-hmm.
It's still increasing exponentially. Today, Trump has ordered all of his department heads, his cabinet heads, to cut 5% from the budget. I mean, you know, who are we kidding here? It's just nobody's taking it seriously, and they've just been on an orgy of spending, and really, it's not heading in the right direction. So we'd like to kid ourselves and believe that you can go on with profligate spending indefinitely, and it's just not going to matter. But eventually, it catches up, and the piper's got to be paid.
And since you mentioned that was today's news story, I should have mentioned it's Wednesday, October 17th, 2018, for those who are keeping track at home.
Yeah, so that's number one. I think this realignment, if you will, rejiggering of the U.S.'s position in the world, which I think Trump has been handling pretty well, of, you know, not getting into wars for the sake of whatever reason we got into a lot of these wars. He's managed to not get us in. You know, there were a couple of bomb runs at Syria, but they weren't really meaningful. Nothing really came of it. No big deal. So, you know, the idea of like, hey, we'll lead where maybe no one else is willing to do it or no one else can do it, but there's got to be support, and that means, you know, from our so-called allies, we need to be getting, you know, support both morally and financially, because the U.S. just can't afford to do this job any longer, that it became the self-appointed world's policeman.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's changing somewhat. And then the media, the mainstream media, the modern media, which is Google, Facebook, Twitter, etc., the fact that they've got a war on diverse opinions. You know, this is endemic of society where diverse opinions aren't respected, and especially if they're conservatives. And basically, the whole of the left is just telling you to shut up if they don't agree with you. And that is a dangerous trend, not so much from the standpoint of society coming apart at the seams. I don't think that's really the result of it, but just as an inhospitable, unhappy society, and a society lacking critical thinkers when they're most required, when they're most needed. And that's why it's so dangerous, because the educational system in the country has been going down the tubes since I was a kid, and nothing's been done to change it. And the result is what we see now. Kids going to college have no business being in college. They have no business, doing what they're doing, taking on all this debt. We get back to debt again. And then they don't learn how to think critically, so they're totally unprepared for the world in which they find themselves. And then they cry about it and ask for student loan forgiveness.
Yeah, you're highlighting there about the loss of rational thought and the ability to hold rational-based conversations is a real concerning one, where the language becomes misused and logic goes out the window, and it all becomes about feelings. And when that becomes so manipulatable by the powers that be, it makes for our populace being much more vulnerable, really, more subject to authoritarianism and so on. So it's interesting that the one quote it's been misattributed supposedly to either Voltaire or Patrick Henry. Supposedly it was Evelyn Beatrice Hall was the author who said this is actually the spirit of what Voltaire talked about. Was I do not disagree. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. It's something that I was taught when I was growing up by my dad, and he always was one about standing up for your position and that sort of thing, even in the face of speaking truth to power, that sort of thing. But it's getting to be where people really are, in many situations, intimidated out of speaking up about what they truly think is right, or even being able to talk rationally with people about it.
Yeah, and the results of this are obvious. If you just look at the election in 2016, the pollsters blew it. They had no idea what they were talking about, what they were doing. And I knew that Trump was going to win almost from the first moment he threw his hat in the ring. Actually, in July of 2015, there was never a question. Hardly a day went by when I didn't know he was going to win. And the reason why the polls can't be right anymore is because nobody's going to tell them the truth. In fact, I self-proclaimed October as National Lie to Your Pollster Month. And there's a lot of reasons you should lie to your pollster. Number one, who the heck is this person who's calling you? They could very well be working for either the Democrats or the Republicans, compiling a database, updating records, and depending how you answer the questions, you get scored on whether you're a good Republican or a good Democrat or a bad one, bad either party, and it's none of their damn business. I don't want them tracking me. And number two is that journalism's so lazy, polls become a substitute for news, fake news. Polls are fake news. Before there was fake news, there was polling. So these polls 39.5% approve of the job that Trump's doing. Well, once you take out the people who are lying, which is probably half, who knows how many people really are. So you can't allow polls to take the place of news. That is a real abuse of the position that broadcasters hold in our society. So that's another reason you should lie to them. And then the other reason is it's none of their damn business. And when they put out these polls are agenda-driven with a preconceived conclusion, and just a complete, they're there to manipulate the populace, to manipulate your vote. So the less reliable polls become, the better off we're all going to be, because polls become a substitute for thinking, and they become a substitute for news. How about, instead of saying 41% approve of Trump, go out on the street and find out why people approve or don't approve. But when you have the poll, you don't have to do anything. And it's a lack of critical thinking and a willingness on the part of the public to accept garbage as news. Look, news is entertainment. We can't deny that. Everything we do in the media is entertainment at some level. But I like to go back to the Greek concept of entertainment. Like when you're watching a Greek tragedy, you kind of know how it's going to turn out, but there's a lesson in that. So you're being entertained and you're learning something about yourself and humanity. And unfortunately, I don't think there's a higher purpose for keeping up with the Kardashians. I don't think you really learn anything other than you waste time and you live in this voyeuristic kind of bubble that provides no fulfillment after the dial has turned or the TV's been shut off. You don't think, gee, that was really a great episode of the Kardashians, you know? It was so profound, the way you just don't come up with those thoughts. It's rare, you know, Donegan, even when we go to a movie these days, it used to be you'd go to a really good movie and you think about it for a day or two.
Yeah.
Now you just leave the theater on to the next dose of internet or whatever.
Yeah, the next stimulus. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a really bad trend.
Something you just mentioned about polling being so manipulated and so on. Even when I've received these polls in the mail that you're supposed to fill out and send back in, I look at them, and even if I think I might agree with the position that I believe the pollster had when they wrote this, it really irks me, the manipulative, distorted, loaded, it's just ridiculous. As a scientist, I look at that and I just think, this is terrible science. This is just horrible. And that's absolutely true, that when you talk about manipulating, I think if we can get enough momentum going where people hear on the news that this candidate's getting ahead, then they'll want to go with the crowd, go with the winner, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, and yet the incivility and the refusal to accept others' viewpoints has started to diminish the validity of polling and the distrust of the public, by the public, of the media, of the agenda-driven nature of these polls. You know, I always give the example, if you're taking a poll for PETA about Trump, you say, President Trump was seen on the White House lawn kicking a puppy. Do you believe that he supports animal rights, true or false?
Right.
Of course. What's the answer to the question? Now, that is absurd because I don't think Trump likes dogs enough to kick one, but he's never had a dog. So, hey, some people don't. That's okay. Doesn't mean he doesn't like them. But it's an absurdity, a reductio absurdum.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. Like, we don't have arguments based on facts anymore. It's like, I hate what you're saying, I hate you. And that is not the means of advancing the public discourse, which is what in theory, a Republican form of government, a representative democracy, relies upon. So if you can't have honest debate, then it's very hard to move on issues. Then it just breaks down, and then somebody just makes a decision because it's got to be made. And that's the end of democracy, which it may or may not be a great system. They probably only last for a certain time, a certain amount of time. You know, they have a certain shelf life. We've seen it over and over again. Rome, Greece, and countless.
Oh, empires have a life cycle, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and democracies.
Okay.
Usually, republics. These empires are based upon republics.
That's how they start out, anyway.
They get corrupted, and then they turn into dictatorships. And look, I don't think Trump's a dictator, but I'm sure that others who were running for president could well have been. So, you know, these things are problematical, and they're very hard to fix. You would think with all the things available on YouTube, the internet, people could learn these things on their own, but somehow there's no desire, and there's just no appetite for knowledge in this country anymore, which you see demise of newspapers, books. You know, people just don't do that stuff anymore. That is a trend that I find is, I don't want to call it anti-intellectualism, but it's more like a hedonistic tilt in society to just go with whatever feels the best at the moment and not think about what's going to happen in the future.
We, as you know, from when we spoke at the Liberty Mastermind Symposium, are homeschoolers, and all of our 5 kids were brought up through homeschooling. And one of the things that one of the teachers that we attended on how to teach writing talked about critical thinking being so essential to become a good writer. And he talked about that there's such a huge loss in our current electronic culture where every child grows up with one or more screens in front of their face, and the software or the whatever this environment that they're immersed in is just to get them feeling entertained and get them to be getting instant gratification constantly, and that we lose. We're actually training, just like just someone lifting their weights was training their body. We're actually training our minds to be in this receptive, passive audience, immediate gratification mode, rather than inquiry and exploration, and as you mentioned before, the lack of vigorous debate. And we've even seen that in university environments. Universities were supposed to be islands of critical thinking, in a sea of chaos or whatever, and yet that's where we've got now have to have safe zones if somebody comes on to discuss what might be unpopular or politically incorrect opinion, because everyone feels so emotionally threatened by it, or at least they're told they should, and the whole topic of a snowflake generation of millennials being unable to have a rational conversation, but you just have to react emotionally and unfriend somebody or whatever. So that's really concerning about what, like you said, where this leads to, because wasn't it our founders of our nation that said that it takes an educated populace to be able to hold a republic together? And if education requires thinking, and thinking requires communication and debate and so on, and we can't do any of those things anymore, we really are in a tough stage of our evolving life cycle of our republic, turning into whatever they turn into at the end of an empire.
So true.
I was just going to ask you if you're ready for some viewer questions after those encouraging thoughts.
I don't want to say that it's all negative, because if you are inclined to be a lifelong learner and you want to keep learning and expand your horizons as a person, then we've never had a better opportunity than now. The internet just provides so much, and smartphones and all that. Look, I try to keep my video viewing down, but reading information is the only real way to learn. You cannot learn watching a screen, watching characters, watching television. You just can't learn that way. So fire away with the questions.
Sure. We've got one from Stephen Rowan, who asks, going forward, what is the best store of value for the future? Precious metals, real estate, cryptos, or food storage?
I guess I would say kind of all of the above. Look, I'm not convinced. I'm about to write an article about cryptos, the vulnerability of cryptos. Bitcoin's only got 7,000 nodes in the world. And look, a government, not necessarily our own, but any government in the world, the one aspect of sovereignty that gives you the most power over your people, over your country, over everything, is the ability to print money, the ability to issue a sovereign currency. And anything that threatens that, you take on the entire world. To think that only 7,000 nodes are what are keeping Bitcoin going, that's rather shocking. 7,000 nodes, there are countries, there are companies, there are individuals that possess the computing power to shut down cryptos, and all you have to do is shut down Bitcoin for a week. Shut it down for a week, or make it so the transactions are taking 48 hours or 72 hours. That is the end of it, because you will never garner trust for that crypto again. You don't have to break it. You don't have to destroy it. You just have to temporarily disable it. And that is my biggest concern with cryptos, which doesn't mean you shouldn't have some, but you've got to be very cautious. When you see huge gains, you must take them. You can't go swinging for infinity with any investment. That's how I've gotten burned before, and that's seen others. And I've gotten burned in 3 bubbles. And it really is just a matter of, you look at the chart. When the chart says it's going to go on forever, you better sell and take a good chunk of profits, or you are going to live to regret it for sure. So gold, yeah, right now it's probably good buy. It's going to get better. I can't tell you when. I mean, we've been in a 7-year recession, depression for precious metals, commodities, most commodities, but oil's going up. Probably gold's going to go up at some point. Don't ask me when, but it certainly will. Gold and silver, and then yeah, you always should have some emergency food storage. I had a sponsor years ago, so I bought all of my stuff. They gave me some, and I bought it at greatly discounted prices. But you can store canned goods. Just rotate your cans out and keep an extra month or two. I think once you get past a month or two, if it's that bad a event, whatever it is, you're probably screwed. But if you look at Florida here, even then, I'm sure there were a lot of preppers in this area, but their houses disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
Look, in the other part of Florida that was built much later and has building codes that actually mean something, you would have a good portion of the housing stock still in place. But you need to think about that. Natural disasters is why you should always be prepping for food, always have water on hand, all these things. It's a must. Real estate, residential real estate, multifamily housing, but beware of cycles because it's cyclical by nature. It looks like we're getting to the top of the cycle. I look at certain houses in Florida on Zillow. The housing prices are going down in Florida. Florida, there's it looks like downtown Beijing. There's cranes all over the place. Construction like there's no tomorrow. And we could easily be getting to the peak of the cycle. The only thing that leads me to think maybe not is that what's happened with the new tax bill, the blue states particular, but high tax states, most of them happen to be blue. There's some red ones in there too. They're running for the exits. People are voting with their feet. They're getting the heck out, and you see softening in New York City real estate in the New York City suburbs, and that's a real cause for concern because if you can't count on New York suburban property in high income suburban areas to retain its value and appreciate, then you're getting to a top. So, but on the other hand, where you are in the Midwest, nothing is appreciated that much. So your risk of buying property for rental income in the Midwest, in various areas of the South, not in the go-go markets. It's like the average investor should not be buying Miami real estate, New York real estate, whatever. You need to be looking at local homes, single-family homes for rental. Did I answer that?
Yeah, very, very, very thoroughly. This is an interesting one. It gets to it's pretty interesting because it's talking about the sort of the motivation for why we would want to have a unprepared populace. Don Niespel asks, what is the real reason that Americans are not being educated in advance for the coming financial turmoil? He goes on to give some color to it. It appears Russia has bunkers available to her people in times of crisis. Certainly panicked, prepared Americans is preferable to panicked, dead Americans. So why would our leaders not be helping people to realize they need to be more prepared?
Well, there is this management of perspective economics, or I can't remember.
Perception,
what.
Yeah.
Perception, management of perception, perspective, same thing. MOPE. And if you start getting people worried about a crash, then they start altering their other activities, like, they're not going to go to the movies as much, or, they say, well, I think I won't buy this car right now. I'll just hold on for a little bit, blah, blah, blah. And that's what you have. So the government doesn't want to upset the apple cart and perhaps turn it into a self-fulfilling prophecy. But I believe totally that the destruction of the educational system in the United States was a conscious plot by the elites to downgrade the country. And what's his name? Robert Deckard Price writes extensively on this. I've had him on the show a number of times. He's a brilliant educational critic. And just the fact that, look, we've known for 50 years now that phonics is the best way to teach reading, sounding stuff out. But the brilliant liberal establishment, educational establishment, and I repeat myself, they came up with the whole language method, which doesn't work. Kids don't learn it, they know it. And it's even been codified in certain states like California. You have to use phonics. They still don't use it. So that seems to me to indicate a conscious plot to dumb down the country, because a dumb populace is a populace that's easier to push around and make them do what you want to do. So as far as educating them, it's almost not the function of government to prepare its citizens for disasters. It's almost like the government is much better at trying to pick up the pieces of the disaster than trying to be proactive and say, hey, you know what? It'd be a good idea to keep a couple of months worth of food. You don't have to be crazy about it. You don't have to be an extreme prepper. You don't need a fallout shelter, but they won't do it. And part of it's intentional, part of it's by design, and part of it's just they're no good at it anyway. Look how many people stayed in the panhandle. The government for days was saying, get out of here, or at least 2 or 3 days. Get out, you're going to die. I mean, that's basically what Governor Scott said, and thousands of people didn't listen to him. All right? You could see that storm on the map as well as I could, and if I was there, I'll tell you what, I would have gotten out. I left here last year for Hurricane Irma. I'm in a much more solid housing unit right now, so I would think about it. But 160-mile-an-hour winds, that's pretty tough. You really don't want to go up against that flooding and all that stuff. So, hey, in answer to the question, part of it's by accident, part of it's by design.
This is a little bit in the similar theme from the previous question. Gary Farmer asks, he says, I have no use for gold or silver in good times or bad times. I believe in food, water, shelter, ammunition, guns, spare parts, batteries, tires, fuel that will get you through the hard times where gold and silver won't. Any thoughts to people who think that it's just more practical items are going to be of more use?
Yeah, well, look, if we have Mad Max, then right, look at the cars they were driving in Mad Max, right? So I personally don't believe it's going to come down to that. But if we have something that doesn't go as far as we're back on our own, in our own little tribes, kind of basically producing or keeping our stuff running, if it doesn't get that bad, but the dollar becomes worth 90% less overnight for some unforeseen reason, at least to us, then, it's an insurance policy against chaos. And that's the way you need to look at it. It's just another tool to protect your family and yourself in the event where things really do get bad.
This is a question that we faced a few years back, and J.S. asks, what should I do with EE bonds that are earning 4% or I bonds that are earning 5%? Keep them or cash them in? And before we say anything, clarify again, we don't give personalized financial advice on this channel, but we do talk about perspectives to give people things to think about. So your perspectives and those that you have interviewed talking about government bonds at this time.
Well, here's the beauty of those bonds is you can't lose principal, all right, by cashing. You can cash them in any time, and it tells you exactly how much you get on the back of the thing. You can cash them in at any bank. And 5% in the current interest rate environment, not so bad. Mm-hmm. So unless you've got something else that you can use the money for, or you need to diversify your holdings, if it was me and I'm holding them, and I got $10,000, $20,000 worth, they're in the vault, whatever, if I don't need the money and I've got the other things that we talked about, not such a bad thing to hold on to them. It's hard to find 5%. I don't want to call it totally safe because it's only as safe as our government, and our government's not real safe.
And the buying power of the fiat, as you mentioned. Yeah.
Right. It's safe for now. Okay? In the absence of chaos, it's safe for now, and you can't get many better deals, but you have to look at the day where it might not be safe and then plan accordingly. So if it fits into your plans, great. If not, get rid of it.
This is one that's in the spirit of what I think a lot of our viewers have asked over the years. Bad Banterer asks, okay, this is assuming, the assumption going in here, the premise is that you actually have a significant amount of money that you'd like to put someplace safe. You're trying to protect something. Okay, you're in escrow to sell $1 million property, or for whatever reason you have $1 million. You've looked at foreign banks that have not implemented a, quote, bail-in scheme. None exist that you can find. Central banks, IMF, or whoever have forced them all to adopt this. Local banks said that FDIC no longer insures based on the value of individual accounts. They now, quote, insure based on the ownership of the account, so spreading your funds across multiple accounts garners no additional protection. Based on going all metals in a non-bank vault seems excessive, but no bank seems safe. Based on possible terrible timing, it's quite possible your funds end up in the banking system during the melee. Where can you send the money in order to avoid a huge haircut?
Yeah, it's really a tough question. Yeah, I wouldn't trust any banks outside the United States at all. They could be gone in a flash. And with what's going on in Italy, the EU, they're still doing QE. You know, it's not good. So you got to accept the fact that there's going to be a certain amount that's not going to be protected. That's why so much money has gone into the stock market. It's viewed as safer than banks and safer than government debt by many. You know, and the flow of funds from all over the world into the stock market's why it keeps going up. It's got nothing to do with fundamentals. It's just got to do with flight capital, getting your money out of unsafe places. So, look, you can go to multiple banks. It's not really going to do you any good. If there's banking crisis, there's banking crisis. That's why you want to have that 15% or so core holding of precious metals. So if the fiat becomes worthless, the metals will become will go up astronomically. You know, the problem is I don't think that's necessarily the most likely outcome. I think the most likely outcome is you're going to take a big hit because inflation just ramps up and they can't stop it. So we don't go to hyperinflation. We just go to high inflation, which is like 5 to 12% a year inflation, which could happen. It's happened before. Happened after World War II. Happened during the 80s, during when interest rates went up to 20+%. Obviously, the system's a lot less stable than it was back then, and we've got these huge networks too. Everything's a network, and those networks, the bigger they get, the more they're handling, the less potentially stable they are, or the more susceptible they are to breaking down, even without any cyber attacks or anything else, just because they're very complicated. And the more complicated something is, the more chance there is that it's going to break down.
What do you think about the ultra-rich who have, whether it's Ted Turner or the Bush family or whoever, who have supposedly bought large ranch lands or productive farmlands, that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, the rich can do what they want. You know, the rich are different than you and I. As F. Scott Fitzgerald said, they're in a different position, and they can build their bunkers in New Zealand or whatever. You know, it's like their options are a lot more than ours, but we all have options. That's what you need to realize. We all have options.
On your channel, the Financial Survival Network, you talk a lot about what people's options are and what's really going on out there. Can you let people know what kind of message and guests you have on and where they can get plugged in?
Oh, yeah, sure. You just go over to financialsurvivalnetwork.com or kerrylutz.com. Either one should take you there. And guests, I'm always looking for new guests, always looking for new opportunities, always looking for new viewpoints, because we all tend to get locked into the echo chamber where we hear what we want to hear and don't hear what we don't want to hear. That's the basis of critical thinking. So my mission is just to give you as many different viewpoints as you can, and then you're going to have to take responsibility and make your own decisions. I'm not in the business of making decisions for others. I don't run money. I don't do any of that. I got sponsors, but you run your own life. I don't.
Well, we have been talking with Kerry Lutz. He is the founder and host of the financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Kerry, as always, thank you for joining us here on Reluctant Preppers.
Hey, it's been a pleasure, Donegan. Thanks for having me, and good luck to all of you out there. And just keep working at it, and you'll find the way.